Let's listen to some of your fellow Presbyterians sharing their own faith stories and what more light means to them.
I think that a movement for More Light matters for a couple of reasons. One reason is just simply that most of the Presbyterian Church today is not a place where lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender folk are fully welcome. And so a movement like More Light is trying to make the church a place where we will be welcome. Another reason why it's important is just for the purposes of celebration. At a church like ours, we have the luxury of not having to fight for having a place at the table, because at least at the congregational level, we all have a place at the table, and it is a very welcoming place. And so for us, being a More Light church, more than anything on the week-to-week life of the congregation means that we have a chance to celebrate that. We have a chance to celebrate being the kind of community that we are.
It took me a while to figure out that one of the reasons why the church felt so right was because they welcomed me for all of who I am. At the time, I was just coming out as a bisexual man, and it was very I felt like I was sort of in a haze, but that local congregation, the people there, made a very clear statement by affiliating as More Light that they were 100% welcoming and affirming of who I am.
For one thing, the More Light movement has for me made me feel like the church was my church again. Not just our own congregation, but throughout the church there are other congregations for whom this is not only their theology but their practice.
I think people also are looking for a church that really reflects what the world is like. And as Bernie said, we have people who are coming with their children, and we have a Sunday school that's growing. And I think that's what people want their children to know. They want their children to see what the world is like in a loving and kind setting. It's as important to me to be as open and inclusive to those people who are not like me as it was to Martin Luther King, who felt it was important, and it is important, that we have justice and equality to all people.
But simply welcome us from our very beginnings as the children of God we are and always will be. Hope with me for that kind of future.
As Presbyterians, we welcome disagreement as an avenue for discerning God's will. In 1978, the church withheld full membership for gays and lesbians. It took the wrong path. The tragedy is that for 30 years, our church has suffered greatly because of that mistake. This bad policy breaks unity in the body of Christ. It causes lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender persons to doubt that they are children of God, loved by God, and welcome in our churches. And this anti-gay policy gives support to hate speech, hate crimes, and it is used to oppose equal rights for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender persons and their families in civil society. Then and now, many Presbyterians disapprove of the denigration of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people in our church. Imagine if this policy of prejudice and discrimination did not exist. This policy has become a sanctimonious cover for homophobia. Imagine, instead, what the Presbyterian Church would be like if it embraced lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and heterosexual persons in the same way, simply as children of God, all part of God's new family. Welcome to Stories of Presbyterians, more light stories of people, couples, families, and local churches who have found ways to become God's new family. Think about it. Our world needs to have as many Presbyterians as possible working to relieve human suffering, to bring compassion and care to a hurting world. Because of this policy, we cannot afford to lose any more people.
The world is full of need. The biggest crises that we face in the world today are pretty easy to enumerate. Global warming and an environmental crisis that's huge. Problems with massive migrations of people who are uprooted because of the impact of globalization and the fact that they just can't make it anymore. Peace issues and violence and what's going on around the world because of violence that's being acted out in people's communities in ways that they can't control. The question is, how's the church going to respond to that? And what is the church going to look like that's going to be most effective? It seems to me that the church that's going to respond effectively to the crises of the world today is the one that's inclusive, fully inclusive of all of God's people. Jesus asked one question and one question only. Are you willing to pick up your cross and follow me? And insofar as we can find anybody willing to take on that challenge, all people, LGBT folks, folks who are straight, allies, folks who aren't allies, whoever they are, anybody who's willing to pick up their cross and live a radical life because of who Jesus calls them to be, that's what this church has got to be all about.
The challenge and responsibility for a church of privilege is to provide hospitality, welcoming the stranger, making sure that no one is left out, no one excluded, offering a place at the table for everyone.
I grew up in the heart of the white, middle-class, privileged Presbyterian Church USA. And I've had the great fortune as an adult to be challenged to give up a sense of privilege, to experience other cultures, whether that's crossing the border of the U.S.-Mexico border and spending time with folks who are both documented and undocumented, whose lives are very much at risk in this place, or whether it's working with folks in other justice issues, homeless folks, and lately building relationships with folks in the LGBT community. The greatest possible gift I could have received as a child of God is the gift of inclusion, diversity, and the unity that we build as we celebrate one another's differences.
Well, as I read the gospel in the context of this community seeking to live out the gospel, hospitality is really a core gospel value. It's not what we do around parties and festive occasions. It is the core of who we are and our identity as followers of Jesus. Communion, the sacrament of Holy Communion, is where we enact that each week. We try to be faithful to the open table that Jesus began in his life and ministry. And so we're trying to live into that vision of an open table where all are welcome. We see that very explicitly in our work with migrants crossing the desert, that we are called to respect and love the stranger, for we were once strangers, the biblical refrain goes. And so we are reaching out to them as guests and welcome them into our life, as well as folks who've been ostracized or outcast in our society. We want to be a place of welcome and hope.